Yes, yes, welcome back, producer friends. When you know here, and we are talking about bass lines today. Not that bass line. I don't even know what that is. Yeah, that's the bass line I'm talking about. If there's anything that I learned from my younger days of playing bass, it's that a good bass line can get people moving, and a bad bass line can absolutely kill the groove, especially in house music when the bass line is so key. And sure, you could just browse through Splice, find a bass line that you like, throw it into your song. But I see two main long-term issues with that. Number one, you don't learn anything and you don't exercise your creativity. I mean, at this point, you might as well just shut off your computer and go put together a puzzle or something if you want to make music like that. And two, you have no customization. Say you want to switch up some notes in the bass line, or maybe write a cool little turnaround, or even change the key of the bass line. A lot of this is going to be a lot of a pain in the ass and take up just as much time as if you would have wrote it in the first place. Now, don't get me wrong, I have zero problem with people using Splice and writing with audio loops. Absolutely, especially if you're a beginner and you're just learning the, essentials of your DAW, go for it, 100%. But in my opinion, if you want to break through to like the next level of music production, you're gonna need to learn some things that I talk about in this video. Anyways, now that I'm done ranting, we're going to talk about the four main components of a tech house bass line: sound design, note selection, rhythm, arrangement. Now let's hop into Ableton and start talking about these specifically. All right, so first we're going to get into sound design. So for this example, I'm going to use Serum, but for real, any of this stuff can be done in 99% of the synths out there. So if you don't have Serum, no problem. Use any native synth or even Vital. Tech house bass lines in a sound design sense are all about simplicity. So I'm not going to dive too deep into any crazy sound design stuff in this video. I did do a deeper dive on a video. You can check that link in the description. But I can go over how to make an extremely basic one and maybe offer just a few small tips and tricks to make them more expressive. So just a blank instance of Serum. We're going to turn the sub on because we're going to be making bass lines. And I really like to have just a wave sitting underneath everything. We can bring the level down. Another quick thing is to turn off random phase of oscillator A, because this is a bass line and we don't want any phase issues. If you don't understand phase right now, no problem. Just bring that random down and you should be good to go. So now we have something that sounds like this, but it's extremely bright. So we're going to need to filter out some of that high end using this low pass filter here. But we want this filter to jump every time we hit a note. So what we can do is go to envelope 2 and bring the sustain down, bring the decay down so it's pretty tight, like 200 milliseconds. And you can see the shape here. Our filter is going to follow that shape. So we can just drop it straight onto the cutoff. And then I'm going to grab the little blue wheel and adjust it a little bit. But now it sounds like this. And it doesn't have to be exactly whatever hertz. I mean, you can literally just use your ear for this and do anything that sounds good to you. So now we have a pretty decent bass sound. But I think there's some small things we could do to make this a little bit more flexible. So what we can do is grab this velocity note. And velocity is essentially how hard you're hitting the note. If you go up to a piano and barely touch the key, it's going to make a different sound than if you slam the hell out of it, right? So this is a way through MIDI to kind of simulate that. So basically, we're going to just take this velocity and drag it onto our decay for envelope 2. And we'll pull that back a little bit and maybe adjust it just a little bit. So now, if I barely hit it, we get a different sound than if I hit the note harder. And this can really add a lot of expressiveness. The very last thing we're going to want to do is turn on mono, turn on legato. This basically just makes it to where we're only playing one note at a time. And this is good because you can get a lot of muddiness when you start to play notes all at the same time in the low end. We're going to also bring up the portamento. This basically makes it to where if you press two notes at the same time, it'll glide to the next note. It'll almost lag a little bit on the way to that next note. So your two best friends for note selection are going to be minor pentatonic and major pentatonic scales. These are basically simplified versions of the minor and major scale and are perfect to write bass lines with if you're not super great with theory. But before we build out the scale, let's go ahead and choose a root note. I usually find somewhere between G and D to be a good starting point for like bass heavy music. Closer to G for more like funky things, and closer to D for things that are going to be a little bit more dirty. Either way, you find a root note, and this is going to be our home bass. So every time we hit this note, it's going to feel strong because it's the key of the bass line. So say if we choose an F as our bass line, see when we go down and hit that F, it feels super strong. But the way that you're going to want to go ahead and build out, say, a minor pentatonic scale, if we're starting on D, is going to be a D, and then up 3 notes, 1, 2, 3, minor third, and then up 5 notes to a fourth, 7 notes to a fifth, and 10 notes for a minor seventh. And then at that point, we're back at D, which is the octave, and the whole pattern repeats. But say if we're in D sharp, the very next note, you would literally just take all of those keys, keep the same interval, and shift them upwards 1. An old school trick that I don't think you have to worry about anymore in Live 11, but if you're like me and you're on Live 10, is to actually draw out the notes of the scale, move them behind the bar, and fold them like this. Let me show you. So like I said, we'll have a D, an F, G, A, and C, and D. So let's take those, move them up an octave as well. And all we got to do is go back behind the bar so they don't actually play and hit fold. And now we have a really, really simple way of writing our bass lines where you don't have to be counting out those intervals every time. So that is a minor pentatonic scale. But for a major pentatonic scale, all you would want to do is go ahead and move your second right here, your second note, which is the third in the scale. We're going to just move that down 1, and you're going to move your seventh right here up 1. And that will be a major pentatonic scale. One of the most crucial factors in this, and across the entire track in general, is swing. Swing essentially moves every other 16th note back in time or to the right a little bit in Ableton. And this is going to add a human-like quality to the rhythm of your bass line, and trust me, it's essential for house music. Luckily, adding swing in Ableton is super simple. You're going to hit this little groove pool button right here, and it is going to open up a groove pool. You're going to right-click and go Browse Groove Library, and in here, we're going to find swing. Feel free to experiment with these other kinds of swing. I just enjoy 1645. You can drop that straight onto your MIDI clip right here. And if we open up the groove pool again, you can see we can actually adjust how much. So if we have the timing at 0, there's no swing being applied. At 100%, it's obviously at 100%. So you can go in here and fine tune it. So in one bar of music in 4/4, we have 4 quarter notes, 8 eighth notes, 16 16th notes, right? It's just subdividing. So we have one beat here, another beat here, another here, and another here. And you can see that they actually change colors in Ableton to make it a lot easier. So if I were to do something like this, these are eighth notes because there's 8 of them that make up the full bar. But we also have 16th notes. So if we were to take these and double them, which you can do right here, now we have 16 notes making up a bar. So a way to think about this is that quarter notes and eighth notes are going to be kind of like your strong beats. They're going to feel like they're chugging. Whereas if you're going to be using 16th notes in there, you want to kind of like throw them in like salt and pepper to kind of create a groove. So let me show you what I mean. So if we take a G, bring our velocity down a bit. If we bring our G and we have an eighth note kind of pattern going on like this, and I'll bring the drums in for context. You can hear that it's just chugging constantly. And it does have a groove to it, but not nearly as much as it could have if, you know, it was broken up a little bit. So say we start using some little 16th notes. Say we take this one, move it back like this, and maybe just throw in another 16th note right here, something like that. You know, you can really just start to use your imaginations once you're within these confines. But remember, silence can help add to the groove just as much as having notes do. So you'll want to have little breaks in between your bass line. It'll make the groove a lot stronger. Feeling G that much, so let's move it down to an E and start playing with some of those notes. And don't forget that the velocity of these notes will actually change the expressiveness. So if we bring the velocity down on these first couple of notes, maybe we can have it move up with the bass line. So those notes kind of like pop out, you know what I mean? So these notes with the velocity up will pop out a lot more than the ones with the low velocity will. All right, and the last section of this video, which I'm calling arrangement, is actually very, very simple. So there is a technique called a turnaround when you're writing a bass line, where essentially at the end of 4 or 8 or 16 or whatever, 32 bars, you have the bass line do a different thing, and it kind of like resets the pattern and it refreshes it for your ear. So you can see here that I've copied out the bass line that we have for 4 bars. And over here, I'm just going to essentially change the pattern up and make a different variation. So like maybe it stays on this G instead of going down to the E, and we can move some of these around like this, maybe. Thing like this. So this will really reset your ear and keep things fresh for those 9-minute extended mixes that you have. The only other thing I can think of for an arrangement would be like using an EQ and actually like low cutting a lot of the sub out like this. And then dropping it out when you want it to come back in. That's a really good technique to use as well. But that is it for the Tech House Bassline tutorial, guys. I really hope this was helpful. If you want to see more content from me, go follow me on Instagram. Become a Patreon on Patreon if you want to support the channel. Other than that, guys, I'll see you in the next one.